My name is Myra Thornton. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a software engineer from Columbus, Ohio. Last July, I came home from a 4-day work trip, rolled my suitcase up my own driveway, and found my clothes packed into cardboard boxes in the upstairs hallway. While a shiny new lock sat on my master bedroom door, and my older brother's television murmured behind it. My parents were downstairs at my kitchen table, drinking coffee I paid for, acting like nothing in the world had moved. Taking my bedroom was only their opening move. By the end of that summer, my family would demand half my house as their personal space, and what I did about it would put all 4 of their names on a court docket, in front of a judge, in a room where being family counts for exactly nothing. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally stand up, and families learn that love is not a lease. If you have ever been the one who gives until it hurts, the responsible one, the one who always pays, this story is going to feel familiar. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you will want to hear how this one ends. Let me back up, because you need to know what that house meant. It's a 4-bedroom craftsman in Westerville, a quiet suburb north of Columbus, with a porch swing and a maple out front that turns traffic light red every October. I bought it 2 years ago, when I was 29. No help. No cosigner. I started doing co-op semesters at 19, writing code for an insurance company while my roommates went to football games, and I saved like it was a religion. The down payment took 10 years of skipped vacations and a car with crank windows. I'm not complaining. I'm explaining the math, because my family never did that math. In my family, I've been the fixer since I was a teenager. When Brett, my older brother, buried himself in credit card debt at 28, I paid it off. When Dad's truck died the same month as his water heater, I covered both and called it a birthday gift. When Mom wanted the whole family at a lake cabin for her 60th, I booked it, and nobody asked how much it cost, because nobody ever asks the fixer. I minded less than I should have. Being useful felt like being loved, and I hadn't yet learned the difference. But the house was different. The house was the one thing that was only mine. My name alone on the deed. My key in the lock. On Saturday mornings, I'd drink my coffee on that porch swing in total silence, and the silence belonged to me too. I got exactly 2 years of that. Then, one Tuesday in February, my mother called with a voice like warm bread, and she said the sentence that started everything. "Honey, we need a little favor." Here was the favor. My parents had sold their ranch house on Beckley Street, the one Brett and I grew up in, because the yard and the stairs had gotten to be too much. They'd put a deposit on a brand new condo in a 55-plus community out in Delaware County, and the builder promised an April closing. 6 weeks of a gap, give or take. On top of that, my dad, Dale, was scheduled for knee replacement surgery in the middle of March, and their rental options with a walker involved were slim. My mom, Carol, laid it out sweet and simple. "Just till the condo's ready, honey. You've got all that room." And look, I'm not a monster. He's my dad. Of course they could come. But I'd watched enough family arrangements curdle to know that temporary is the most dangerous word in the English language. So I did what I do at work when a project has fuzzy edges. I wrote it down. I sent my parents an email that night, friendly as a greeting card, with the terms in plain sight. They'd take the guest room and the hall bath. We'd split utilities down the middle, and I put a date on it. 8 weeks, a buffer past the builder's promise, with a line that said we'd revisit together if the condo slipped. I read it twice before I hit send, feeling equal parts smart and guilty, the way you do when you make family sign in at the door. My mother replied 4 minutes later. No sentence, no signature. Just a single red heart emoji. At the time, I took that as a yes. I know better now. A heart emoji is not a yes. It's a door you left unlocked. They moved in the middle of March, 2 days before Dad's surgery, and the first week was honestly fine. I drove Dad to the hospital, kept Mom calm in the waiting room, and set up the guest room with a shower chair and his pill organizer. This is what family does, and I was glad to do it. The rearranging started in week 2. I came home from the office and my kitchen had been reorganized. pots where the bowls lived, my good knives hidden in a drawer, because that's how a kitchen should flow. My coffee maker got demoted to the pantry to make room for Mom's 12-cup percolator. Then Dad's recliner arrived from storage, a huge brown thing that landed in my living room like a meteor, aimed at a television that now never turned off. Fox in the morning, westerns all afternoon, volume set to hurricane. I'd come downstairs at 6 in the morning and the house already smelled like bacon and sounded like a rerun. Small things, grain of sand things. I let them go, one by one, because Dad was healing well, and the finish line was April. Then April arrived, and the builder called, and the closing slipped to June. Supply issues, they said. Everybody's got supply issues. Mom relayed the news with a strange little brightness, patting my arm. Looks like you're stuck with us a bit longer, sweetheart. That night, I updated the date in my calendar and told myself 8 weeks was always the realistic number anyway. Then, on a Sunday, I was hauling laundry past the guest room and heard Mom on the phone with my Aunt Debbie, her voice easy and proud. "Oh, we're all settled in," she said. "You should see what we've done with our house." Our house. I stood in the hallway holding a basket of towels and I let even that go. Almost. In May, I lost my office. It happened politely, the way everything in my family happens right up until it doesn't. Dad's physical therapist recommended a stationary bike and a set of resistance bands, and Mom decided the only possible location was my first-floor office, the one room where I could shut a door and earn the money that paid for the whole operation. I work from home 3 days a week. I said as much. Mom smiled like I'd said something adorable and moved my monitor to the dining room table. "You're young, honey. You can work anywhere. Your father needs his equipment on one floor." So for the rest of the spring, I took video calls at the dining table while a western thundered behind me and a percolator burped like a swamp. I'd mute myself to say things like, "Mom, I'm presenting," and she'd stage whisper, "Don't mind me," while unloading the dishwasher one clanging pan at a time. I want to be fair. Dad did his exercises. He got stronger, he graduated from the walker, and by early June he was driving again and taking the stairs like a man 10 years younger. Which meant, if anyone had asked, that the medical reason for any of this was over. Nobody asked. I circled the end of June on my mental calendar and promised myself a reckoning. A kind one, with pie, but a reckoning. Then one evening my phone rang, and the screen said Brett. And I remember standing very still at the counter before I picked up. My brother never called me. He hadn't called on my birthday in 3 years. Brett only ever called when something was broken. This time, the broken thing turned out to be his entire life. Brett is 35, 4 years older than me, and until April he was a production supervisor at an auto parts plant outside Dayton. The plant cut a third of its staff, and Brett was in the third. He'd hidden it from everyone for 2 months, letting the severance quietly burn while he told Kayla, his wife, that things were in motion. Kayla was 4 months pregnant. Their apartment lease was up in June, and their landlord wanted a renewal signed or the keys back. All of this came out in one long, aggrieved phone call in which my brother never once said the word sorry or the word please. What he said was, "So we're thinking we'll just set up at your place till the baby comes. Mom already said it makes sense." I looked at the wall for a second. I said, very carefully, that I was sorry about the job, that we'd figure something out, and that I needed to think about what was possible, because I had a full house already, and a family under my roof was turning out to be a lot. That's not a no, you'll notice. I've replayed it 100 times, and it still wasn't a no. It was a, "Let me think," from a woman who'd been trained her whole life never to say the other thing. That Friday, I flew to Seattle for a 4-day sprint review that had been on my calendar for a quarter. Sunday night, my phone buzzed in the hotel. It was a text from my best friend Jess, who lives 3 streets over from me, and it said, "Hey, random question. Did you know there's a U-Haul in your driveway?" I stood at that hotel window looking at the Seattle skyline, doing the time zone math, and I understood that whatever I decided no longer mattered. My mother had already opened my front door. I got home Monday night to a house that had been colonized. Brett's truck sat in my spot on the driveway. The second guest room, the small one I used for my treadmill, was packed to the ceiling with their belongings, and the overflow filled half my unfinished basement. Kayla, sweet-voiced and enormous in a way that made every sentence feel like a hostage situation, hugged me at the door and said the drive-up was brutal. Brett hugged me too, big and loud, like this was a reunion I'd won. There she is, Casa Thornton. My mother stood behind them, beaming like she'd pulled off a surprise party. Family shows up for family, she said, and squeezed my arm. I want you to know I didn't smile and swallow it. I said, in front of everyone, that this was not what I'd agreed to, that I'd said I needed to think, and that 6 weeks was the absolute ceiling while they found their own place. Starting the apartment search this week. Brett waved me off with a laugh. Relax, it's temporary. You sound like a landlord. Everyone chuckled at that, even Dad, and the conversation moved on to nursery colors like weather had passed through. Later that night, I carried a box up from the entryway because it was blocking the door, and I noticed the label, written in Brett's blocky Sharpie capitals. It didn't say kitchen stuff or bedroom stuff, the way normal moving boxes do. It said, Master Closet. I stood there holding it, listening to my brother laugh at something on the TV in my living room, and a cold little fact walked into my head and sat down. He hadn't packed that box for a visit. He'd packed it for a house he already considered his. Let me tell you what temporary costs. My mortgage runs $2,380 a month with taxes and insurance, and that was mine. Fine, I signed for it. But by July, the utility bill for a house with 5 adults' worth of laundry, showers, and a TV that never slept came to $610, nearly double my normal summer bill. The groceries I bought on Sunday were gone by Thursday. Nobody chipped in unless I asked. And when I asked, Mom acted like I'd passed a collection plate at a funeral. The utilities split from my email, never mentioned again, and every time I raised it, some emergency bloomed. Brett's job search, as far as I could tell, consisted of a gaming headset and the phrase, I'm doing consulting, delivered from my couch at 2 in the afternoon. He stayed up until 2 or 3 every night in the living room, which shares a wall with the small bedroom, so I fell asleep to gunfire from a video game and woke up to my mother's percolator. Kayla, meanwhile, had begun nesting. In my office. She taped paint swatches to the wall next to Dad's exercise bike, little squares of sage and butter yellow, and talked about when this is the nursery, in the same tone you'd use for a settled fact. I started staying late at the office on my in-person days, and on the bad days I'd sit in my car in my own driveway, eating a drive-through salad in the dark, because it was the only room I had left. 20 minutes of quiet, then in through my own front door like a guest. I kept telling myself it was 6 weeks. I had no idea that upstairs they were already measuring my bedroom. In late June, I called a house meeting. I'd typed up a 1-page plan, 5 copies, like a project kickoff. Chores on a rotation, a utilities split, itemized, and 2 dates in bold. A check-in for Brett and Kayla's apartment search, and a move-out target of mid-August, 6 weeks out, generous by any measure. I set the pages on the kitchen table in front of my whole family, and I watched my brother read the first line and start to grin. She made us a PowerPoint, he said to Kayla, and my mother laughed before she caught herself. Then Mom did the thing she does, where she puts her hand flat on the paper like she's soothing a spooked animal, and she said, Sweetheart, we don't do contracts in this family. We take care of each other. Dad studied his placemat like it held instructions. Kayla said the baby was making her tired, and that was somehow the closing argument. Nobody signed anything. Nobody agreed to anything. The pages ended up under a pizza box by 8 o'clock. That night, I did something small that turned out to matter. I opened my phone and started a note, and I wrote down the date, what I'd proposed, and what was said. Quietly, a habit was born. If you've ever stood in your own kitchen holding a plan while your family laughed at it, while the people you'd bailed out for years told you contracts are for strangers, then you already know how this felt. And I'd genuinely like to hear your version in the comments. And subscribe if you've ever been the responsible one, because the responsible ones need each other. 10 days after that meeting, I flew to Seattle again. and that was the last night I ever spent in my own bedroom. You already know the scene I came home to, but let me walk you through it properly, because the details matter. It was the Monday after the 4th of July weekend. I rolled my suitcase up the driveway past Brett's truck, let myself in, and climbed my stairs. In the hallway outside the small bedroom sat 4 cardboard boxes with my name on them, my clothes, folded by hands that were not mine, my nightstand drawer dumped into a freezer bag, my books stacked spine up like firewood. On top of one box, face down, was the framed photo from my closing day, the one of me on the porch holding the keys. And on my master bedroom door, where there had never been a lock because I lived alone, there was a shiny new brass knob with a keyhole. I knocked. My brother opened my bedroom door the way you'd open it to a delivery driver, shirtless, easy, a baseball game going on my TV behind him. Past his shoulder, I could see diaper boxes stacked on my bed and Kayla's suitcase open on my dresser. "Oh, hey," he said. "We figured you wouldn't mind. You're barely here anyway, and Kayla needs the bathroom at night. Pregnancy stuff. You get it." Behind him, Kayla waved from my reading chair. I stood in my hallway in my work clothes, and I heard myself ask where my parents were, because some part of me was still certain this had happened over their objections, that downstairs I'd find allies. Brett actually smiled. "Kitchen," he said, and went back to his game. My parents were sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, and the second I walked in, my mother's eyes went to the ceiling, toward the master bedroom, and then quickly back to her cup. They hadn't been ambushed. They'd helped him carry the boxes. They knew. What followed in my kitchen was the conversation that taught me who my parents were, and I say that as a woman who'd known them 31 years. I kept my voice level. I said Brett and Kayla had taken my bedroom, installed a lock on an interior door of my house, and packed my things without asking, and that all of it would be undone by the weekend. My mother folded her hands and explained patiently, as if I were the confused one. Kayla was pregnant. Kayla needed the master bathroom at night. "Pregnant women can't be running down the hall at 3 in the morning, Myra." I pointed out calmly that the small bedroom and the master are on the same floor, 4 steps apart, and share a hallway with the same bathroom Brett and Kayla had been using for a month. There was a pause you could have parked a truck in. Then my mother switched arguments without blinking. The way you switch lanes. "He's going to be a father, Myra. Do you understand that? A father needs to feel like a man in his own space. His own space. In my house." I looked at my dad, my last hope in that kitchen, and Dale Thornton, a man who once drove 4 hours in an ice storm to change my tire, studied the newspaper like the newspaper had asked him a question. He didn't say a word. That silence had a weight I can still feel. I said the room would be returned by Sunday or we had a serious problem. And from the staircase behind me, where he'd been listening the whole time, my brother's voice came down pleasant as a weather report. "Or what?" Just that. He wasn't angry. He was curious, the way you're curious about a bug on its back. "Or what?" I stood in my kitchen and realized I didn't have an answer, and he knew it. That Sunday, my family threw a dinner in my house to announce how they were dividing it. I'm not exaggerating for effect. Mom made a roast. Kayla set the table with a centerpiece, and when the plates were cleared, Brett stood up at the head of my table, my chair by the way, and delivered what he called the family plan, with the bright, rehearsed confidence of a man unveiling a quarterly strategy. Their growing family, he explained, needed real space, so they'd keep the master, obviously. That was done. My office would become the nursery. Kayla had already picked the paint. They'd take the living room as their family zone in the evenings, and half the garage for his tools and the baby gear. "Basically, the upstairs/front half is our personal space," he said, drawing a line in the air over my table, "and you've still got your room, and the kitchen, since you're the cook around here anyway." He grinned at that, like he'd paid me a compliment. I waited for my parents to laugh, because it was objectively hilarious. A man with no job and no lease, standing in a house he didn't own, awarding himself 50% of it. My mother nodded along. Nodded. Kayla pulled up a Pinterest board of the nursery, my office, and passed her phone around, and my father looked at paint colors for a room in my house that was being confiscated and said they were nice. I said one thing. I said, "Brett, this is my house." And my brother looked at me with genuine, unbothered warmth and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "Come on, Myra. It's not stealing if it's family." Nobody flinched. Forks kept moving. I excused myself, went up to the small bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop. That night, I stopped arguing with my family. I started reading Ohio law instead. Here's what I learned first. What my family was doing to me was, in the eyes of the law, mostly legal. And what I wanted to do back, mostly illegal. The week after the dinner, Brett annexed the garage. I came home to find my mower, my Christmas bins, and my kayak sitting on the lawn like evicted tenants, replaced by his workbench and 40 boxes. That was the day I called the police non-emergency line, because surely, I thought, somebody official could explain to my brother whose name was on this deed. A patrol officer came out, a polite guy about my age who kept his hands in his vest and listened to everyone. Then he took me aside on my own porch and gave it to me straight. My parents and my brother had been living there for months. They got mail there. That made them residents of the home, regardless of whose name was on anything. If I changed the locks or set their things on the curb, I'd be the one breaking the law. Ohio calls that an illegal lockout, and residents can actually take the homeowner to court over it. "The way this works," he said, almost apologetic, "is you'd have to evict them. Formally, like any landlord." Evict. The word dropped into my quiet street like a stone through a window. I remember laughing, one short, unfunny laugh, and asking if he was serious. Evict my own parents. He shrugged in a way that told me he'd seen this exact movie before, in nicer driveways than mine. "Civil matter, ma'am. I'm sorry. So understand the position I was in, because I need you to see it clearly. The law protecting my house was the same law protecting the people taking it, and every fast, satisfying option you're yelling at your screen right now would have handed my brother a lawsuit with my name on it." The next morning before work, I did something that felt small and turned out to be the hinge of my whole life. I took a red folder from my office supplies, one of the last things in that office that was still mine, and I filled it. The deed, with my name alone on it. The closing documents from 2 years ago. My mortgage statements. Every one of them paid from my checking account. The email I'd sent my parents in February with the 8-week terms, and the heart emoji reply, screenshotted with its date. The utility bills, before and after. Photos of the new brass lock on my bedroom door, of the boxes with my name, of my kayak on the lawn. The note on my phone from the house meeting, printed. 10 minutes of quiet paperwork at the dining room table while my mother's percolator gurgled, and my hands were perfectly steady, and that's when I knew something in me had already decided. Then I did the part I still think about. I didn't file that folder in the house. There was no longer one drawer, one closet, one room in my own home that I trusted to stay mine. So I walked out to my car in my work clothes, opened the trunk, and laid the red folder flat in the wheel well under the cargo mat. My documents were now safer in a parking lot than in my house. On my lunch break, I sat in that same car and made 2 calls. The first was to Jess, because when you're about to do something enormous, you tell your best friend. The second was to a law office downtown, landlord-tenant practice, a name with sharp reviews, Rachel Voss. The folder weighed maybe 2 pounds. Carrying it across that parking garage to her office 2 days later, it was the heaviest thing I have ever lifted. Rachel Voss had gray-streaked hair, a handshake like a stapler, and an office overlooking the courthouse she clearly lived in. She went through my red folder page by page, no expression, and then she gave me the bad news first, because that's what the good ones do. There would be nothing fast about this. My family were what Ohio calls tenants at will. People living in a home with the owner's permission, paying nothing, holding no lease. Getting them out lawfully was a staircase with no elevator. Step 1, written notice terminating their permission to live there, 30 days. Step 2, if they stayed, a 3-day statutory notice, the one every Ohio eviction stands on, with its exact language printed word for word. Step 3. If they still stayed, filing a forcible entry and detainer case, a real eviction lawsuit, at the municipal courthouse, then a hearing in front of a magistrate a few weeks out, then, if I won, a writ, a red tag on my own front door, and county bailiffs. 8 to 12 weeks, start to finish, if nothing went sideways. Her retainer was $2,500. Then she gave me the good news, tapping the deed. Sole title. No lease, no rent ever paid, no money ever changing hands, notices I could prove. Legally, this is the cleanest case I'll see this month, she said. Emotionally, it's the worst kind I do. She capped her pen and looked at me the way I imagine surgeons look at people before they mark the skin. Ms. Thornton, almost nobody serves their own mother. Whatever the outcome, the family you had before the papers, that version ends. Are you sure? I looked out her window at the courthouse for a long moment. I told her I needed one more week. Not because I doubted the law. I wanted to give my family one last chance to be my family. A week later, on a Thursday, I came home and asked everyone to sit down, and I put an offer on the table that I still believe was more generous than anything they'd earned. Mom and Dad could stay until their condo was ready, genuinely, warmly, no deadline, if they backed me on one thing. Brett and Kayla needed their own place before the baby came. And to make that real, I would hand my brother $2,000 toward a deposit on an apartment. Plus I'd cover their movers. A gift, not a loan. All I wanted was my bedroom back, my office back, and a date. I watched my brother listen to all of it with his arms crossed and a small, patient smile, like a man waiting for a child to finish a knock-knock joke. Then he made his counteroffer. He'd been thinking, he said, and the smart play, for the family, long-term, was for me to sell him half the house, at its 2019 value, before the market ran up, because you'd basically be gouging your own brother otherwise. He'd pay me back monthly, no interest, once he landed something. Or, simpler, he said. And here he actually reached over and patted the back of my hand. I could just add him to the deed. For the baby's stability. It's one signature, Myra. I sat there doing silent math on the years I had bled into that down payment while my brother priced my house like a yard sale lamp. I said no. Just that word. Whole. Nothing softening it. Maybe for the first time in my adult life. And into the silence that followed, my mother set down her coffee cup and said quietly, without looking up, "Don't make us choose, Myra. You won't like it." That night, I sat in my car in the driveway and signed Rachel's retainer agreement against the dashboard. My hands didn't shake at all. That's the part that scared me. Before I tell you about the notices, you need to see what my family did with the days in between, because they didn't wait quietly. The Thornton family group chat, 22 people, 3 generations, lit up like a scanner during a storm. Somehow the story going around was not, Brett moved into Myra's bedroom and demanded half her house. The story was, Myra is threatening to put a pregnant woman on the street. Aunt Linda called to remind me that I had so much, and that some people would be grateful for family filling a big empty house like mine. Mom's church added our family to the prayer list for healing, and 2 ladies I hadn't seen since high school messaged me praying hands emojis. Kayla started posting TikToks, soft piano, her hand on her belly, captions like, "Some people value square footage over blood," and my cousins ate it up 100 likes at a time. And through all of it, my mother moved through my house serene as a lighthouse, repeating my brother's line to anyone who'd listen, like it was something she'd cross-stitched. "Your brother's right, honey. It's not stealing if it's family." The one person who saw it straight was my Aunt Debbie, my mom's younger sister, who called me one night and said, "For what it's worth, they pulled this exact thing on your Aunt Ruthie back in the 90s. A house has a way of making Thorntons forget whose name is on it." Then she sighed and said she loved me but couldn't be in the middle, and the last neutral witness left the field. I understood. I stopped explaining myself to relatives after that. But it was that same week, standing at the end of my driveway with the group chat buzzing in my pocket, that I opened my mailbox and found the envelopes. and the envelopes changed the temperature of everything. My mailbox was full of other people's lives: Brett's name, Kayla's name, a car insurance renewal, a credit union statement, Kayla's prenatal clinic, appointment reminders, and on top, the one that stopped my breath in my throat, an official confirmation from the Postal Service that mail forwarding for Brett and Kayla Thornton had been activated to my address. I stood at the curb and read the effective date twice, because I couldn't believe it the first time. The forwarding had been set up in the last week of May. They moved into my house in June. My brother had rerouted his entire paper life to my address before his boxes ever crossed my doorstep, before I'd even given him an answer. And one envelope deeper, a letter from the state unemployment office, his name over my address in the little plastic window, like it had always been his. I walked inside with the stack and set it on the kitchen counter in front of him, and I asked him, quietly, what the date on that forwarding order meant. And my brother, I want you to hear this the way I heard it, over a sink, in a tone you'd use to explain parking rules, said, "It means I know my rights, little sister. Look it up. Residency. You can't just throw family out." He tapped the counter twice with 2 fingers and walked back to his game. There it was. No fog, no drift, no poor Brett lost his job accident. He had researched occupancy law before he ever loaded the U-Haul. The takeover of my house wasn't a family falling on hard times. It was a plan, and I was the last one to be told. If your stomach just dropped along with mine, do me one favor. Subscribe right now, because what I did over the next 60 days is the part of this story my family still won't say out loud at reunions. He was right about one thing, though. I couldn't just throw them out. But just was about to do a lot of heavy lifting. On July 28th, I served my family. Rachel prepared 4 written notices, 1 each for Dale Thornton, Carol Thornton, Brett Thornton, and Kayla Thornton, terminating their permission to occupy the property in 30 days. Copies went by certified mail that morning, and Rachel was clear that the mail alone would do the job legally. But I decided my parents would not learn about this from a mail carrier. They would hear it from me, at the table where they'd knotted away my bedroom. Jess came over that evening, an emergency room nurse misses exactly nothing, and stood by the counter as my witness while I cooked dinner for 6 like it was any Thursday. When the plates were cleared, I set an envelope in front of each of them and said the only sentence I'd rehearsed: "I love you, and in 30 days, this stops being your address." Then I stood there and watched the people I'd spent my life bankrolling open their mail. My mother read 2 lines, understood, and came up out of her chair with a sound I'd never heard from her, half sob, half fury, saying I was doing this to my own mother, that this family was cursed the day I bought this house. Kayla cried into her water glass. My brother didn't even read his all the way. He held my eyes, smiled, and tore the notice in half like a losing ticket. And I heard Rachel's flat voice in my head, from the day she predicted exactly that. Torn paper is still served paper. And my father. My dad read every word of his, front and back, slow. Then he folded it into quarters, tucked it into his shirt pocket behind his reading glasses, and quietly started clearing the dishes. My mother screamed. My brother laughed. My father put his eviction notice away like a receipt. I couldn't tell yet which one of them was going to break my heart. I want to tell you about the one moment in this whole war when I nearly surrendered, because leaving it out would make me a liar. It was maybe 10 days after the notices. I came down at 2 in the morning for water and saw light under the garage door. His half, as he called it. I found my brother sitting on a paint bucket in the middle of his workbench kingdom, not drinking, not on his phone, just sitting, turning something over in his hands. His old plant badge, the laminated one with the terrible photo he used to flash at Christmas like a sheriff's star, back when he was the only Thornton kid with a title. He didn't hear me at first, and for a second I saw my brother the way he must see himself at 2 in the morning, 63 job applications deep, wife due in November, sleeping in a bedroom his little sister paid for. When he noticed me, he didn't put the badge away. He just said, to the floor, 15 years I gave that place. You know I ran a whole shift? Guys twice my age called me boss. And then, quieter, the truest thing my brother has ever said to me. You weren't even trying to beat me, Myra. That's the part I can't live with. You weren't even trying. Standing in that doorway in my bathrobe, I felt the ground tilt. I thought about tearing up the notices, all four, about how easy it would be to go back to being the fixer, loved and useful and slowly erased. Pity is quicksand. I was in it to my knees. Then morning came, and Brett walked past me at the coffee maker, tapped the top of my head like you'd tap a kid's, and said, "Sleep okay in your little room?" The window closed, but my parents had one more card to play, and I'll be honest with you, it nearly worked. The second week of August, my father had chest pains at dinner. Real ones, gray face, hand on his sternum, the fork down, and everything in the room suddenly very sharp. We called 911, and I followed the ambulance to St. Anne's with my mother rigid in my passenger seat, and for 90 minutes in that waiting room I was nobody's plaintiff. I was a daughter doing bargains with God. It turned out to be angina, serious but stable. New medication, a follow-up with cardiology, no procedure needed, thank God. And my mother turned from the triage desk, looked at me with eyes gone flat as nickels, and said, "I hope it was worth it. The stress of what you're doing. This is what it does. You're doing this to him." I stood there under those fluorescent lights and, for about a minute, she had me. I could feel the old machinery grinding. Apologize, fix it, pay whatever it costs. Then a voice called my mother's name from across the waiting room. Mr. Hendricks, my parents' old next-door neighbor from Beckley Street, there with his grandson's broken wrist, came over, all warmth, hugged my mom, and said the sentence that ended my old life. "Carol, congratulations on the condo, by the way. Saw the crew finishing your unit back in early July. My brother-in-law did your flooring. You all settled in yet?" Early July. I watched my mother's face do something I'd never seen it do. She glanced at me fast before she answered him. And that glance told me everything. The condo hadn't slipped to fall. It had been ready for over a month. They could have closed, packed, and left before I ever printed a notice, and they'd sat at my table letting the delay story stand, because my mother wanted the whole family under one roof when her grandson arrived. "Don't make us choose," she'd told me. They'd chosen before I ever asked. The 30 days ran out at the end of August. Nobody packed a box. The deadline passed the way a dare passes. That Saturday, Brett threw a barbecue. In my backyard. A dozen of his buddies around my patio table. Burgers on my grill he'd claimed in the great garage annexation. Country music off a speaker. My brother holding court in a lawn chair like a man showing off his acreage. He caught my eye through the kitchen window and raised his soda can an inch. A little toast. Translation: Your move, little sister. He'd made his read of me, and to be fair, it was based on 31 years of good data. Myra folds, Myra pays. Myra will not follow through on anything that makes mom cry. On Tuesday, September 2nd, the morning after Labor Day, I made my move. Rachel had the 3-day notices ready. The statutory ones. The exact words Ohio law requires before an eviction case can be filed, printed in bold across the top. You are being asked to leave the premises. If you do not leave, an eviction action may be initiated against you. I handed one to each of them, and I taped a copy to the front door, weatherproof sleeve and all, where the whole cul-de-sac could see it, because at some point shame stops being a thing you're scared of and starts being a tool you're done paying for. My mother took hers into the guest room and shut the door. Kayla filmed hers for a TikTok, and Brett read his on the porch, snorted, and delivered his final scouting report. You won't do it. Court? You? He shook his head, almost fond. You've never once followed through on anything that made Mom cry. You're the good one, remember? He handed the notice back to me like a flyer for gutter cleaning. He was betting everything on the old Myra. What he didn't know was that the old Myra died in a hospital waiting room, somewhere between a stranger's congratulations and my mother's flat, dry eyes. On Friday, September 5th, I took a long lunch, drove downtown, and parked in the garage across from the Franklin County Municipal Court. Out of my trunk came the red folder, a little sun-faded now on one edge, and 20 minutes later I was standing at the clerk's counter filing a forcible entry and detainer action, a real eviction case, with my lawyer's paperwork, and a filing fee of about $135. The clerk, a woman with rhinestone readers, checked the caption, stamped it, and slid my copy back without a flicker. Thornton versus Thornton. She sees 100 of these a week, but I stood there a second longer than I needed to, looking at that caption, the saddest law firm never founded. The hearing was set for Tuesday, September 23rd, in front of a magistrate, 18 days out. When the process server delivered the court summons to my house, my family finally believed me, and their responses told you everything about each of them. My mother went quiet and called Pastor Mike. Kayla's TikToks turned into a series, and Brett went on offense, announcing at top volume, to Mom, to the group chat, to his buddies on my patio, his legal theory. He'd tell the judge I had promised him half the house, that he had sweat equity, because he'd primed one wall of my office for the nursery, that a sister who made what I made had obligations, and any judge with a heart would see it. Rachel listened to me relay all this and was quiet for a second, and I could hear her not smiling. No writing, no deed, no dollar ever paid, she said. Ohio requires real estate promises in writing, and the court does not enforce Pinterest boards. Let him give that speech. 18 days until the hearing. My family used every single one of them. They came at me in waves, and I want you to see all three, because together they nearly worked. Wave 1. The ambush. I came home on a Saturday 2 weeks before the hearing to find 30 people in my living room, streamers on my mantle, a diaper cake on my coffee table, and a sheet cake from the warehouse club with blue frosting letters reading "Welcome to the Thornton House." Kayla's baby shower. In my house. Planned by my mother. Hosted in rooms I was suing to get back. And nobody had told me, because, as Mom explained while refilling the punch, we didn't think you'd want to be involved, considering. I said congratulations to a room full of women who'd read a group chat about me, and I ate a piece of that cake standing in my own kitchen like a caterer, and you know what? It was a good cake. Wave 2. The delegation. 2 days later, my Uncle Gary arrived with Pastor Mike from Mom's church, and they sat me down at my own table for what they called a healing conversation, which turned out to be a proposal. I dropped the case. Brett and Kayla stay 1 year rent-free to get on their feet, and the family moves forward in grace. A year. Rent-free. In writing this time, they'd learned that much from me. Wave 3 was Kayla herself, in the hallway that night, hands on her belly, voice trembling. You'd really put a newborn on the street? And that one landed. I'll be honest. That night I sat on the small bed with my thumb over Rachel's number, one tap from folding, and I called Jess instead. She listened, and then she asked the only question that mattered. Walk me through the deal, Myra. What do you get? I started to answer and stopped. You get to keep paying, she said. That's the deal. That's the whole deal. The hearing was Tuesday. On Monday night, my mother knocked on my door with her final offer. She knocked, which should have told me something. Nobody in that house had knocked in months. She sat on the edge of the small bed where I'd been sleeping since July, smoothed the quilt she'd made me in college, and for the first time all summer she spoke to me in her real voice, the one from before, the one that used to read to me. Drop it, honey. Tomorrow morning, call the lawyer, drop it, and everything goes back to normal. We'll forget this whole thing ever happened. You're my daughter. I don't want to lose you over a house. And here is where I have to be honest with you about the price of things, because normal was not a small offer. Normal meant Sunday dinners and my mother's voice in the kitchen. Normal meant being at the hospital in November when my nephew took his first breath, instead of hearing about it from a group chat I'd been removed from. Normal was the thing I had been buying, installment by installment since I was 19 years old, and my mother was offering it to me one last time at the usual price. Everything I had. That's the choice nobody tells you about in stories like this. It isn't good versus evil. It's the family you wish you had versus the person you actually are, and you only get to keep one. I took her hand and I said it as gently as the truth allowed. Mom, normal was me paying for a seat at a table you all owned. I'm done renting. I'd rather be your daughter than your tenant, but I won't be your bank. She pulled her hand back, and the real voice went away, and the lighthouse came back. Then you'll sit in that courtroom alone, she said from the doorway. She was almost right. My mother didn't come to the courthouse. My brother did. He brought a speech. If you've never seen an eviction docket, put away your courtroom drama expectations. It's a plain room with wooden benches and a ceiling fan that ticks, 30 strangers holding paperwork, and a magistrate. Ours was a silver-haired woman with the energy of a school principal in week 30 of the school year, moving through cases like a checkout line. When they called Thornton versus Thornton, we took our 2 tables. Rachel and me on one side, red folder open. Brett on the other in the good blazer Mom bought him. Kayla beside him, due in 9 weeks and dressed like a church witness. The magistrate asked her questions in a voice that had asked them 10,000 times. Whose name is on the deed? Mine, alone. Certified copy handed up. Is there a lease? No. Has any rent ever been paid? Any amount? Ever? Not $1. And I watched her glance at Brett for the contradiction, and Brett agreed, proudly, because in his mind paying rent would have been the insult. Were the notices properly served? 30-day and 3-day, certified mail receipts, witness affidavit, photographs. The magistrate nodded along like a woman checking boxes. Then Brett stood up and gave his speech. And I'll grant him this. He'd practiced. He talked about family meaning something, about verbal promises, about the wall he'd primed, about sweat equity, and a sister with 2 incomes worth of luck. The magistrate listened with her chin on her hand until he wound down, and then she asked him her 4 little questions. Do you have that promise in writing? Is your name on the deed or the mortgage? Have you paid toward the property in any form? Do you contest that you received proper notice? 4 no's, each quieter than the last, and it was done. Ohio law wants real estate promises on paper, she explained, not remembered fondly. Judgment for the plaintiff. Writ of restitution to issue. Move out ordered within 10 days. 90 seconds of questions. That's what his empire came to. In the hallway afterward, Brett detonated. Called me a traitor to my family, loud enough that a bailiff drifted over, said I'd bought a judge the way I bought everything. I waited until he ran out of air, and I kept my voice at kitchen table volume, and I gave him back his own words. You keep saying it's not stealing if it's family. The judge just gave it a different name. And then, because 15 years of ledgers were finally closing, I added the rest. You taught me family keeps score, Brett. I'm just the first one who wrote it down. The law gave them 10 days. My parents used 2. My brother used every hour. And then some. My parents closed on their condo that same week. The condo that had been sitting finished since July, a fact nobody mentioned and everybody knew. The moving truck came on a Thursday. My mother directed the loading of the recliner and the percolator with the bearing of a deposed queen, and when the last box was in, she stood on my porch, looked past me at the house like it was a person who'd disappointed her, and delivered her exit line. I hope this house keeps you warm, Myra. No hug. Down the steps. Into the truck. That one still aches, and I've decided it's allowed to. But my father stayed behind a minute, and this is the part I didn't see coming. Dale Thornton, who had barely spoken all summer, took his old toolbox out to my back gate. The one that had screeched like a barn owl since March, the one he'd promised to fix back when he could barely walk. And he oiled the hinges and squared the latch until it swung silent. Then he came into the kitchen, set his key to my house on the counter, and next to it an envelope with $400 in worn 20s. For the utilities, he said. Their half. Or some of it. And then, my dad looked somewhere over my shoulder and said the longest speech I ever heard him give. I watched my father do this to my sister Ruthie. Whole family camped in her place, called her selfish when she finally hollered. I told myself I'd never sit that quiet. He picked up his toolbox. Turns out quiet is a thing you inherit, kiddo. I'm sorry. And for what it's worth, You deserved to hear the truth about that condo months before a stranger handed it to you in a waiting room. I knew. I just didn't have the spine to say it myself. He was gone before I could do anything with that. One set of keys back. One to go. My brother had 10 days, and he'd barricaded himself in my master bedroom. Brett's last stand was exactly as strategic as the rest of his plan. He didn't apartment hunt. He didn't call the legal aid number the court gave him. He spent his 10 days telling the group chat I'd never go through with it. The judge was a formality. Myra folds. Myra always folds. While Kayla's mother quietly started boxing the nursery things when he was out. On day 10, a bailiff's deputy knocked, checked the writ, and posted the red tag on my front door. Notice of restitution, property to be vacated. And on set-out morning, a crew showed up with the bailiff to carry out, item by careful item, everything my brother had refused to move himself. I had asked Rachel every question about how to do this part with a shred of mercy, so the baby things had been set aside first, wrapped, staged in the garage. Nobody's crib went on a curb, whatever the group chat says to this day. I didn't watch from the porch. I want that on the record. There was no lawn chair, no lemonade, none of the victory lap theater I'd been assigned in the family's telling. I sat at my kitchen table where every terrible decision of that year had been announced, and I listened. Packing tape, boot steps, the particular scrape of a bed frame coming down my stairs, my brother's voice out front getting louder and thinner at the same time. And then a truck door, and then another one, and a diesel engine idling. Kayla had called her father. Ray Kessler is a retired lineman from Grove City, a big quiet man with a handshake like my dad's, and he showed up in his pickup, embarrassed to the roots of his hair, and loaded his pregnant daughter's life into the bed without commentary. The only thing I heard him say through my kitchen window was to Brett, who was mid-speech about betrayal and blood, and it was this. Son, nobody took a thing from you. Get in the truck. They pulled out at 4 in the afternoon. That night, for the first time in 7 months, I heard my own refrigerator hum. People pay therapists good money for less than that sound. The locksmith came Saturday morning, legally now, gloriously, boringly legally, and rekeyed every door in the house while I drank coffee on my porch swing like a woman relearning an old language. Then I walked through my own home like a stranger touring it. Nail holes in the master bedroom wall where Brett had mounted his TV, the ghost line of tape on the living room floor where his family zone had been announced. One wall of my office primed gray, the only work my brother's sweat equity ever completed. I stood in the middle of the master bedroom, in the quiet, and did the accounting I'd been avoiding all year. Not the $2,500 for Rachel, or the $135 for the filing or the utilities, or the 2 decades of bailouts before that. The real ledger. I had spent 15 years paying dues to a club that told me the dues were love. Every rescue, every swallowed no, every check I wrote to buy 1 more month of belonging. That was rent, and I'd paid it faithfully. And the moment I stopped paying, they moved a better tenant into my room and called me selfish for noticing. You taught me family keeps score, I'd told my brother. Here's what I understood. Standing in that empty room, they'd always kept score. The only thing I changed was refusing to lose on purpose.